Prologue. No shit, Ellie. I can see my lung. Alexia Feldston had spoken matter-of-factly into the comms equipment inside her circular helmet. White smoke and yellow wisps of fire had continued moving undefined across her blurred vision as she reoriented. The blast had torn open Alexia's substantial warrior's coat, exposing her skin to the alien moon's atmosphere. She had already cauterized the giant wound and applied the translucent stabilizers to her ribcage, but the grapefruit-sized hole was still visible. The bloodied fringes of her open coat had floated nearly weightless along her sides, hovering amongst the smoke like improvised wings. "What the hell, Ellie? I'm watching myself breathe here. I should be done by now. I'm half dissected." Alexia had slowly inhaled, delicately expanding the brown pleural tissue of her lungs inside her burnt torso. Her breaths had remained surprisingly controlled. The stabilizers had been a recent invention. They projected a spontaneously calibrated energy seal around her chest cavity, allowing her diaphragm to contract and expand in its normal pressurized environment. But the translucent, smart containment field still allowed larger objects to enter from the outside, facilitating easy ongoing surgical repairs without compromising the integrity of her respiratory system. "I need you to focus," Ellie's voice had amplified slightly inside the helmet. "You're still in this, Lexi. Stats matter." "My chest has a window, Ellie," Alexia had returned. Ellie's voice had grown stern. "I need you to concentrate on your breathing. You're going full pain in 3, 2, 1. Alexia screamed. It was as though she had been struck through the side of her chest with a mallet that was twisted sideways and pulled out again. The pain was a special kind of overwhelming, maybe the worst she'd experienced in the field. Some of her previous injuries had lingered with her for months, as if each traumatic memory existed as a residual phantom limb. This one would stick around for a while. I'm alive, Alexia said, steadying her breaths with short puffs of air. She had pictured time slowing, along with the frantic thumping of her heart. "Yes, Lexi, you're alive. You've been here before," the voice in her helmet had comforted. "Now I need you to moderate your awareness. You've got several marks coming in fast." With each exhale, Alexia had imagined the sides of her right lung peeling away from the sticky internal circumference of her chest cavity. She had stood enveloped inside the white smoke of battle on the distant moon. In the relaxed gravity, more of the blinding particles had seemed to hang stubbornly in the air. Then 2 of them were on her. Alexia's bodysuit had begun to glow red, whirring up with potential lethal energy. "Great," Alexia said, as something disturbingly wet had suctioned against her face shield, further obscuring her vision. "These systems don't play nice together, El." The fringes of Alexia's chest stabilizers had begun throwing sparks as soon as the automated defense system engaged. Bright bits of shrapnel fizzled in the air with the scent of burning flesh. "Disable perimeter defense," Alexia had said through calculated breaths. "Alexia, do it now, Ellie, or we lose," Alexia had barked in return. Her bodysuit had been made plain again, illuminated only by what little light penetrated through the moon's atmosphere from its distant sun. The skin around each stabilizer attachment point had still hissed as the external ribs glowed faintly with accumulated heat. Alexia pulled the suctioned alien limb sideways across her visor. It had squeaked like wet skin across clean glass. Each enemy was a third her size and naked from the waist up. One had tangled her legs with a half-dozen constricting appendages. The other had inched a single fleshy probe past Alexia's containment field, right into her exposed chest cavity. The further it reached, the more Alexia could feel her lungs contracting, refusing to fill with air. 2 points to 1, Ellie. That's a win, Alexia had whispered through a shallow breath. She gripped 2 of the burning stabilizers with her gloved hands and tore them from their attachment points, jamming the first through the back of the creature on her legs and the second through the chest of the resident beast above her waist. Both stabilizers had flickered blue as they worked in tandem to calculate new containment field parameters. Alexia quickly grabbed the long edges of her torn coat, pulling their substantial fabric through the smoke-filled air. She had reached her arms around both enemies, enclosing them inside a great embrace of singed material. Alexia had created a fabric cocoon. A new containment field had briefly flashed blue around the artificial cavity, and as Alexia's brain was emptied of oxygen, Both of her attackers suffocated to death inside the makeshift vacuum. If failure could be measured in net losses of life, Alexia's corpse had won. But she was alive again. The simulation had ended. Alexia had worked to compose herself in the emptiness of the debriefing environment, still working through the lingering trauma of the especially violent training scenario. Ellie had materialized before her, another artificial construct, but one that at least reliably provided her with encouragement. "You did very well today, soldier," the apparition had smiled. "Excellent adaptability. You truly are one of the finest in our regiment. The population is safer with a protector like you." "Thank you, Ellie," Alexia had said, poking at the side of her chest again with an implied but invisible limb. "I'd like to disengage now." She had stepped naked from the full-immersed stream bed, still marveling that her chest hadn't somehow been torn open during the exercise. She sat on the floor, moist with the chamber's fluid, her hand pressed against her side. But as kind as they had sounded, Ellie's words had rung hollow again, because they were not true. Alexia had thought about her father. The two of them had not spoken since he was taken to detention. Alexia had tried to contact him, but the detention stacks, along with their associated streams, functioned independently, as if parts of a separate system. Her father was gone. While he had still been free, and when Alexia was only 13 years old, her father had learned that a neighboring homebody had been streaming about his daughter. "That little girl of yours looks a lot better in the stream," their neighbor had said. He had been a filthy man, liquid rations crusted along his lips and dripping from a tongue that had been too large for his mouth. Alexia's father had attempted to convince himself that the man's distasteful fantasies were being addressed in a healthy way, that his horrible streams still somehow contributed to the system's stability. "That's when I asked Annie to let me kill him, Lex," her father had said as they sat in their cube together, waiting for his detention peripheral to arrive. "I figured if he could imagine hurting you in so many ways, well, I could do the same to him." Alexia's face had been expressionless as she continued listening. "The thing about streaming these abnormalities, Lex, and you'll understand this someday, it can sometimes hold people like him at bay, moderates their instabilities, as they say, keeps them satisfied. But for me, the more times I killed that man in the stream, the more I wanted him dead in real life. The more I did it, the more I enjoyed it, Lex, and all the while, whenever the stream ended, I felt less and less satisfied. Nothing I could do in real life could have compared to the terrible things that I did to that man over the last several months in the stream. I did those things to him because I imagined what he was doing to you. When I finally took him, he didn't know it happened. He was there in his cube, and then he was gone. Still think I did him a favor, Lex. I kept him from doing something he would have had a hard time living with." Alexia had refused to answer. She hadn't been sure what to say. "Thing is, that man was going to come for you eventually, Lex. Just like with me, it was only going to get worse. You see, it's one thing to stream some generic fantasy, but it's completely different when there's a living object waiting outside every time the stream ends. So I was going to lose you either way, but he never got to take you from me by force. I know this is hard to understand, but knowing that you're safe is all I ever needed out of this life." Alexia had been old enough to understand her father's words, but she was still too young not to blame him for them. She had never given him a proper goodbye. Years later, Alexia had spoken to Ellie about her father and their untimely parting. The following day, Alexia had begun seeing him inside Ellie's ongoing virtual scenarios. She'd first glimpsed her father piloting a transport ship as it left with a group of warriors to a separate destination. Then she'd watched him walking through a peripheral village as she passed on the way to a recon assignment. But it had never been her father. It had only been another comforting deception. Alexia had known it for months. She had never been training for a coming invasion, or even for a distant galactic battle over crucial resources. She'd never been groomed to protect the populace. No, Alexia was the waiting threat. She was the thing the population had to fear. The violence she experienced during each training scenario was meant to tame her. Each had been fashioned to moderate her instabilities. They had all been designed to counteract her genetic proclivity towards real crime. The next morning, Alexia had ceremoniously surrendered to the stream, but Ellie hadn't been there to greet her. Alexia had found herself alone on some empty planet void of features, but for a gray horizon and a purple sky. She had walked a distance and called for Ellie, but received silence. And then he was there, sitting on the ground with his back to her approach. "Father?" Ellie had said, stopping several meters short of the figure. "No, Miss Feldston, not today," the man had answered. Ellie had taken a single step forward again and stopped. "Who are you, then, and what is this place?" she had asked, growing impatient. The figure had briefly flickered against the horizon, as if a foreign afterthought painted against the otherwise stable and mundane stream. "Who are you, and why do you keep coming to these places?" the figure had asked in return. Alexia had rushed toward the figure. "You know who I am. You know why I'm here, idiot." The man had flickered again and then disappeared, rematerializing again several meters away. "Sticks and stones, Miss Feldston." Alexia had continued glaring through the back of the man's dark coat. "I'm quite good with both, so I suggest you speak quickly." "Well said, Miss Feldston, and it's for that reason that I've come to ask you a question. How would you like to see your father again, soldier?" Alexia had taken a step backwards, physically affected by the unexpected question. "My father's in detention." "Yes, Miss Feldston, your father is in detention. So what you're asking is impossible. I've already tried. It cannot be." "On the contrary, Miss Feldston," the figure had spoken, turning to face her. "Whatever can be, is."